Saw the trend of capital outflow from Indonesia's financial market earlier this week before the election day. What do you think are the primary factors driving it? Steve?
Well, I think that anytime you go into an election and there's some uncertainty, there's going to be some hesitancy in terms of maintaining your position in Indonesia. But I don't think the capital outflows have been all that great. And I think prospects are that after the election, things will pretty much return as normal. And that is simply because all the candidates are working very hard to make sure that they are a candidate of continuity, that the policies of Jokowi have been very, very popular, and that they'll largely be continuing those policies in the near term after the election is settled.
And how do you see the ongoing election will impact Indonesia's economic fundamentals and also financial market sentiment?
Well, I think that the similarity of the candidates means that I think there'll be fairly good stability in terms of financial conditions. If we look at a couple of the major themes of the election, all of the candidates seem to be squarely on the side of continuing to promote economic diversification, of encouraging downstream development of commodities and so forth. They differ a little bit. Anies would like to go beyond looking just at processing nickel to other commodities, but essentially their policies are fairly similar. They're all looking at developing more regional infrastructure around the country to promote growth and to improve productivity, again, through infrastructure, to encourage foreign investment, to improve education, job training, and so forth. Fairly similar general economic policies and fairly close to what Jokowi has been promoting over the last several years.
Interesting. We will move to Vishrut. Vishrut, can you tell our perspective to this ongoing election?
Yeah, sure. So maybe just continuing where Steve left off, we see the Indonesian economy having very strong medium-run fundamentals. This is an economy that is now more than $1 trillion US dollars worth in size, very attractive market for investors who are looking to gain exposure to EM Asia. We continue to think that some of the fundamental growth drivers for Indonesia will remain in place over the medium run. We continue to expect the medium class incomes to be expanding over the course of the next few years. Some of the prospects that are important for voters in the current election, the availability of jobs, climate transition, a lot of these factors are going to be relevant over the next few years. We're likely to see policy moves along those directions that should support the medium-run growth profile of the economy.
Considering the potential for a two-round election, what are the potential repercussions for investor confidence and investment appetite in Indonesia's financial market?
Yeah, the opinion polls going into the election have been indicating a likelihood of a runoff election. I think investors are likely to have priced that there is a strong likelihood of the potential of a runoff and that there could be some uncertainty over the next few months. We do not see significant uncertainty or volatility on the investor side regarding these specific things. So if we look beyond the past week and we look at the past couple of months, capital flows into Indonesia have actually been pretty steady and we don't really see significant panic. We've seen bond yields remain pretty stable. The exchange rate has remained pretty stable as well, all reflecting a sense of investor calm regarding the election developments and also the possibility of runoff further down the line.
All right, we will move back to Steve. In the middle of the uncertainty, how resilient do you believe Indonesia's financial markets will be, especially in light of recent ministerial resignations?
Yeah, I think I'm not so sure the ministerial resignations will mean an awful lot. I think what will be more important is simply the successful conclusion of this election, which looks like it will happen, whether it be one round or two rounds. It has been going very smoothly, and it should. I think the only risk perhaps is that if the election goes into a second round, maybe the campaign gets a little more testy. Maybe the runoff creates a little more polarization between the two remaining candidates. That creates a little bit of uncertainty. But even then, once the second round is finished and there's a winner, my guess is some of that uncertainty will disappear. I think Vishrut made some very good comments that if you go back to the beginning of this year, late last year, there has been very little financial uncertainty at all in the Indonesian economy. The equity market has been stable. The rupiah has been stable. It's actually improved a little bit since January. There's really no real indication of serious investor flight. Also, fiscal policy over the last several years has been very prudent. There's no issue of a big debt overhang that has to be dealt with. That's simply not an issue, which means, again, that whoever wins the election can continue to take this slow, steady approach and keep the economy going. I think it's important also to look back at the last time there was a huge amount of uncertainty in Indonesia, and that was during the pandemic. But during the pandemic, Indonesia performed very well. Its economy did not sink as much as many of its neighboring economies, and it came back fairly quickly. So, it was steady as she goes during that period of uncertainty. I expect steady as she goes during this election as well.
Compared to other countries in Southeast Asia, what factors make Indonesia's financial assets more or maybe less attractive to foreign investors?
Well, a couple things I think one needs to look at in comparing Indonesia to other Asian or Southeast Asian countries is that Indonesia has this vast amount of natural wealth through the commodities that it has, and the appropriate management of those commodities and promoting diversification of the economy through refining those commodities within Indonesia is a very positive policy, which has already started in Indonesia. I think it's also interesting to go back, if you think about the impact of elections on the financial conditions in some of the neighboring countries. Of course, there were recent elections in the Philippines, in Thailand, and in Taiwan. And those elections, they had their own issues, their own problems, but the elections did not create any long-term uncertainty. In fact, in the Philippines and in Taiwan, the stock markets continued to rise after the election and have been doing very well. Only in Thailand have the equity market struggled, but the economy in Thailand is suffering under weakness of exports. So again, the stability of the Indonesian financial markets indicates that the perceived risks are pretty small. And I think that as we get through the election, we're going to see it'll be a very similar situation to the Philippines and Thailand and Taiwan. Longer term, Indonesia has a young labor force. It has a growing labor force. And the only thing that could slow growth would be if productivity is not improved. That's going to be critical going forward because Indonesia has the labor and a young labor force that is growing, and everything that the government can do to help improve productivity will help boost the pace of economic growth in Indonesia.
Move back to Vishrut. How do you think Indonesia's financial asset attractiveness for foreign investors?
Yeah. So once again, I think continuing the theme of the discussion so far, Indonesia still remains a very attractive destination for Asia investors. There has been a degree of maturity, I think, for emerging Asia assets for investors, something that Steve alluded to, in the sense that we continue to see investor interest despite these normal uncertainties of day-to-day business. And so that is a factor that affects Indonesia as well. The institutions have a long track record since the Asian financial crisis of delivering consistent growth across various administrations. We've seen that consistency in the economy as well. The market, there's a couple of other factors, I think, that make Indonesia attractive. So if you compare Indonesia with peers, we see that Indonesia's economy is more reliant on domestic demand than regional neighbors who are more externally oriented, more reliant on trade. The higher share of domestic demand in Indonesia's economy means that its large market size is very attractive as a source of final demand for investors, and that's something that's always going to be a factor for investors looking to expand their market exposure.
And what are the most important focus for the new government to ensure the sustainable economic growth and maintaining investors?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Steve touched on a few of them, just pointing out how productivity needs to be a key focus area for incoming administrations, and AMRO, the IMF, have also pointed out other factors that are important in ensuring sustainable growth. A lot of the factors are relevant to voters today as they go out to make their choice. The availability of jobs for the growing workforce is a key factor. Climate resilience is another key factor. We want to see digital inclusion. A lot of the areas where there is policy progress already over the past few years likely to continue down the road, and that should ensure Indonesia's potential growth rate of around the 4.5–5% mark.
All right, move back to Steve. Steve, what do you think is the most important focus for the new government?
Yeah, first of all, I have to agree with Vishrut. I think 4.5 to 5% growth is something that we should be able to expect for a number of years to come in Indonesia, with, I think, some very positive risks to the upside, and that is if indeed various aspects of productivity growth can be enhanced, and we can look at this via a number of factors. One, of course, is the continuation of the improvement of infrastructure across this vast country that's critical in terms of improving logistics and transportation, keeping costs low. And indeed, if someone is producing in Indonesia for the domestic market, you got to have that infrastructure there to get product out to the market wherever it may be across the country. The second component of productivity growth is education and job training. You've got to provide jobs, but you've got to provide the extended education that's required in today's economy. So the more job training that can be provided either in schools or on the job with employers, the more productive the labor force will be. Wages should go up, incomes should go up. The third would be foreign investment. I think Indonesia simply has to do everything it can to remain as open as possible to foreign investment by making sure that the rules for foreigners operating in the country are very fair, and that tax structures are very fair as well. And finally, the idea of economic diversification, of not only working to go beyond the manufacturing using the basic commodities that are in Indonesia naturally, but of course going towards more higher level manufacturing and higher level services as well. You don't have to go all the way to the top, but just keep adding value to the industries that are growing in Indonesia. I think if all of these can happen, and they really do have to happen simultaneously to improve productivity growth, then the performance of the economy could well do better than what I'm actually expecting